Coming off my longest review yet, I finally get to tackle a big reason why I wanted to review series like this to begin with, to view how later things, in this case video games, learn from previous titles and see what they improved upon, what they did and didn't take from them, and how I feel about their execution and how it stacks up both as a standalone game and as part of its own series and gaming in general. It was a pretty great learning experience in talking about how such a well-known trilogy, almost 3 decades old, that I have passion for, and now tackling Super Mario Bros. 4, I can finally get into the meat of this particular niche. Let's dive right back into this. I can only imagine the excitement Mario fans had in the wake of the early 90s, especially in America, to have gotten one of the better swan songs to a console in Super Mario Bros. 3, and then in 1 year have a next-gen console come out with a new Mario game. That must have been quite a time. I know I loved when I played the original Super Mario Bros. As a kid, trying many rainy days inside the house to get to World 8-4, and when I finally did, later that year in the Christmas of 1996, I'd find a Super NES that Santa had left for me underneath the tree. And then I woke up at something like 4 o'clock in the morning and learned about JonBenet Ramsey's murder on the news. Sheesh, that was a rude Christmas. Anyways, the year-long wait for the 16-bit launch title is something that I also experienced as if I had waited alongside the actual launch vicariously. While we received the system, it wouldn't be until my birthday half a year later that I was finally able to own Super Mario Bros. 4, instead of playing it at demo kiosks at Toys R Us and the odd motel room during some vacations. Even back then, my young self knew that there was something special about this particular game. Something I'd come to realize was that next-gen leap that we all hope our games will take. Fortunately, Mario's sole mainline Super NES title did just that. Out of all the mainline improvements, even to my young, wonder-filled eyes, was the presentation. If you went from All-Stars to World, it's not that big of a leap when compared to the 8-bit originals, but the jump in pixels was definitely felt even in the remakes. World also features an expanded soundtrack, solidifying a bunch of staple Mario orchestrations and melodies. Couple those with the gameplay taking full advantage of new hardware, and Nintendo truly crafted a new classic. Now that I've ruined the suspense of my final verdict, let's quickly dive into story before getting into the heart of what matters in a Mario platformer. Not one to waste time, Bowser and the Koopalings decide to presumably crash land in Dinosaur Land, coincidentally the same location that Mario, Luigi, and Princess Toadstool decide to vacation after saving the Mushroom Kingdom in Mario 3. Not to be outdone even in defeat, the King of the Koopa promptly kidnaps the benevolent inhabitants and traps them in magical eggs, setting up Bowser's admirable work ethic as he secretly plots to rebuild his army. Arriving at Dinosaur Land in a hot air balloon, Mario and Luigi eventually realize Princess Toadstool has been kidnapped once again. Upon running across an empty house, the Mario brothers discover that the benevolent dinosaur named Yoshi has gone out to rescue his friends. Thus, the adventure begins. Once again, the story isn't as important as it is the context and setup for the gameplay itself. You aren't playing a mainline Mario game primarily for story, after all. What this does, however, is set up a theme for the adventure, albeit loosely. Dinosaur Land is why you see said awesome creatures all over the game, including the lovable Yoshi. Alongside the prehistoric theming, World is known for its distinctive slants. Introduced in Super Mario Bros. 3, slopes are used to much greater effect in this 4th entry, including the backgrounds and the first stages. Note, something Super Mario Maker doesn't allow you to actually recreate, so that's something to note, I suppose. Point is, the presentation from the NES games was a great step up here. The jump to the 16-bit Super Nintendo Entertainment System allowed Mario 4 to improve upon nearly every aspect of the previous trilogy. Bigger sprites and effects were the immediate improvement, with the expanded color palette and much more variated animations and enemies to match the environments. There's a reason I've been using a pixelation transition throughout my All-Stars review, and now this one. That effect blew 8-year-old me's mind away. Coming from the original Mario's 8-bit sprites to worlds expressive, colorful, and large ones still pleases me to this day. A relatively simplistic art style isn't a detriment to the Mario franchise. Everything is distinguishable at a glance, and rarely are you ever visually overwhelmed. Add to that various effects used for level gimmicks that I'll get into due time, and a soundtrack that remains eternally hummable, and you have a game that is a true, quote, next-gen experience for one of gaming's premier franchises in 1991. So let's slow down and view why World is such a fan-favorite title by tackling the game in relative order and how masterfully designed a 2D platformer it was and remains to this day, by being boring and tackling the raw mechanical details. To start off, the Super NES controller made standard 4 face buttons on the right, a D-pad on the left with start and select in the middle, and 2 shoulder buttons on top of the bone design. The increased button count allowed Nintendo to free up Mario and Luigi's abilities. In World's case, adding a spin attack on the A button, more on this later, while jumping in the remaining actions were mapped to B and XY respectively. While L and R doesn't do much, they do allow the player to scroll the stage slightly left and right to grant one limited control on the camera. It's something I appreciate as an option to the slower puzzle-based stages or to preview trickier sections, but it is largely unnecessary. Most Mario levels are momentum-based, and rarely are you slowing down for the occasional puzzle, many of which don't utilize the scrolling to begin with. Power-ups are pared down when compared to Mario 3, but this change is ultimately in service to what Nintendo does best, increasing the amount of actions in various situations by doing the most with a limited number of available options in various situations. Instead of simply increasing the amount of things a player can do at any time, Nintendo games tend to limit what a player can do with the fewest amount of buttons and scenarios by triggering various states. In the Mario games, these tend to be the famous power-ups and situations presented by level design. World features the basics of Mario games. The Super Mushroom, Fire Flower, and Starman are the requisite trio of abilities and retain their regular uses. A new power-up is the Power Balloon, which grants slow, airy movements in any direction for a limited time in only 4 specific levels, which makes it more akin to the Goomba Shoe of Mario 3, but the remaining 2, technically 3 power-ups, are more integral to World's identity. The first that shares half the cover art is the Cape Feather, granting access to Cape Mario, no offense to Luigi fans, but I'll be referring exclusively to Mario in this review for simplicity's sake, who is allegorious to Raccoon Mario from the previous game. Cape Mario retains the simplistic spinning attack with said cape instead of a tail this time around, while also granting a more nuanced flying mechanic. While Raccoon Mario worked up momentum on a visible meter letting you know when you had it sufficiently charged up and then slowly came back down if you rapidly pushed a button, Cape Mario works in an identical manner with a few changes. The meter is no longer visible, instead relying on the player to visually detect and feel when Mario hits his maximum speed. And added is a flying mechanic where you can control the speed and height. By holding back, you can potentially fly over entire stages and obstacles, while pressing forward allows you to make Mario dive bomb for increased speed and or slamming the ground, which creates a makeshift ground pound, something World's pseudo-sequel will officially introduce into the series. Rounding out the cape's usefulness is allowing the player to hold the jump button to slowly allow Mario to descend, making it easier than Super Mario Bros. 3 requirement of tapping the button without dropping like a rock to more carefully land on enemies or platforms. Mario remains as snappy to control as ever, even when the series' trademark momentum is more subtly implemented here. Rarely are you sliding into a bottomless pit thanks to a fault that isn't your own. Whenever you miss a jump, it's likely due to player error, be it from a misjudged leap, an obstacle you couldn't quite overcome, or from a distraction from said hazards or mistakes. The controls are rarely to blame for any death you incur. It's their simplicity that allows many Mario games to be readily accessible to any player. You are given a few options at any time. You either take 1 or 2 jumps, or you can textually interact with enemies and objects by jumping on top of them, grabbing them, attacking them, or simply running past obstacles and enemies if you can avoid them. This is classic Mario stuff, and it's easy to see how little the controls have changed even with the modern titles. Don't break what isn't broken after all, and for the most part it all works even 27 years later here in 2018. Adding to the control improvements is the final and arguably most infamous power-up Mario World brought to the series, the friendly dinosaur sidekick Yoshi. While Yoshi isn't technically a power-up in a traditional sense, in that he was established as his own character pretty early on after this due to his popularity that remains to this day, mechanically Yoshi serves the multi-purpose role that Nintendo is often fond of, a contextual multi-purpose gameplay addition that often dictates the level design in the game it revolves around. Not only do you get to ride a dinosaur, a very video gaming inclusion that's always welcomed if you don't take your game super seriously and simply want to have fun riding a dinosaur, his inclusion tied to the overall theme of the game, though don't be fooled, the dinosaur theme isn't as prevalent as the title of the world suggests, while also granting the player extra abilities with the same control scheme and opened up slight strategic gameplay elements. Once Mario frees him from his egg and question mark blocks, Yoshi's debut came with his staple tongue attack, able to eat many of the obstacles in the game that are otherwise best avoided without a Starman, such as most enemies including Pokies, Buzzy Beetles, and even Fire Snakes. Yoshi's boots are able to jump off most enemies and avoiding select hazards, and grants Mario an extra hit and an assisted jump, you treacherous swine. Judgment aside, Yoshi is a fantastic addition to the franchise, essentially giving the player a rideable power-up that can be used in most situations and present varied options and puzzles that are very much appreciated. The semi-strategic option Yoshi grants is based on the colors of Koopa shells he can swallow, which allows Mario to turn the tables on what initially seems like a simple palette swap. Since Koopas can now be shot out of their shells when they are jumped upon, an improvement I'll return to later, they are now able to jump into empty shells of various colors, sometimes changing their behavior and abilities. Increasing the importance and variance of the Koopa Troop was a fantastic addition, as it allowed personality and gameplay to work in unison, albeit at the very minimal level. Green and red Koopas return to walk upright indefinitely and to remain on platforms respectively, while blue and yellow Koopas are added to the mix, with blue Koopas being faster red Koopas that can kick empty shells, while yellow ones are likewise faster green Koopas that will chase Mario, turning into a kamikaze Koopa if shellless, which adds to the variety of the foot soldiers of Bowser's army. Similarly, Yoshi can gain specific abilities depending on the color shell he eats, quote-unquote. Green shells do nothing, but the other three give him limited special abilities. Red shells give Yoshi the ability to fire 3 trios of fireballs, yellow shells give him a sandy stomp that defeats nearby enemies, and blue shells allow him to fly for a limited time. The blue shell in particular relates to a Yoshi-specific power-up that grants him wings that lead the player into a bonus level that often immediately ends the stage after it's used. In addition to the base green Yoshi, there are also matching red, yellow, and blue Yoshis that exclusively use their respective power-ups regardless of the shell they swallow, which can be put to strategic use if you want a specific power. Overall, I love Yoshi in general, since I was introduced to him in this game's kinda sorta sequel Yoshi's Island. In that game, many of his traits were solidified and built upon from his debut in World here, so I admit I am pretty biased whenever he's included in a mainline Mario game. He's functional and adorable, the perfect Mario combination, really. Miyamoto and the team of the original game had wanted to include a dinosaur from as early on as the original Super Mario Bros., but couldn't due to technical limitations, so his inclusion in World, thanks to the next-gen leap the new console generation gave them, presented an extra wow factor that improved the core formula in very tangible ways. Now that the droll mechanics have been overtly detailed, let's dive into the flow of the game itself. Right from the off, the world map is back from Mario 3. Yoshi's house is a safe introductory area where a player can get used to the controls on a single screen, but there's nothing quite like learning as you go. Giving a selection between Yoshi's Island 1 and 2, I wouldn't imagine it'd be out of the ordinary for newcomers to go in numerical order. Right off the bat, World begins its first proper level with a nice selection of new features and differences between this and the NES games. The first enemy shown is a shellless Koopa sliding down a slope, prompting the player to learn how to jump or eat a death. Or if you're like me, you mistime the jumps relearning the physics from 3 to 4, but I digress. Fun fact, this is where Koopas began to walk upright instead of on all fours, and started wearing shoes. Helps with the popping them out of their shells and determine what color they are when shellless. One of the new additions that carry over to many future games are a collectible of some sort to encourage exploration and to challenge players, in this case the Dragon Coins with Yoshi's visage. Collecting 5 in a single stage will grant an extra life on top of points, but they aren't necessary or even recorded in the original SNES game, even though the enhanced port in Super Mario Advance 2 for the Game Boy Advance does record them as a proper collectible. Point is, don't worry about collecting all of these. They're simply for bragging rights here, and unless you're playing the GBA version, it won't grade you for it here. World has another 100% completion criteria, and we'll get to that. Right after those first 2 introductions, a bonsai bill is promptly launched to fill the screen in an attempt to freak out the player and show off more impressive sprites. After removing question mark block containing a power-up, the new enemy Rex showcases a second face state if attacked with a normal jump, and is defeated instantly if a spin jump is used. The spin jump not only has a satisfying sound, but it's also able to hop across various obstacles and enemies without harming Mario, alongside destroying many in single hits. There are some pretty wicked tricks possible with this method that you can witness on really advanced Super Mario Maker levels that utilize Super Mario World's theme, so go check a few out. One of the changes in Worlds is how it handles items compared to Mario 3. In the previous game, you were given a stash of items to use on the world map, for both progression purposes and to help give you a specific power-up or a contextual skip level button. Here in World, you are given an item window that can store a second item for use mid-level. It's a good idea, but I'll dive into that in a later note. Checkpoints are also implemented as midway gates, which also grant you an automatic super form if you trigger them in small form. You can once again grab items introduced like in Mario 3, and you can throw things upwards to hit blocks above you and to nail enemies when timed correctly, something the game will make you do. An immediate improvement is being able to hold shells indefinitely Mario Kart style, if you want to charge forward recklessly to eat a simple hit, so this is a win-win for everyone. At the end of most stages is a giant gate serving as the goal poles and roulette boxes for Mario's 1 and 3. A moving tape encourages crossing it as high as possible, as bonus stars are rewarded for your effort. For every 100 stars a bonus game is playable, so it's pretty standard stuff. One expanded element of World are the expanded use of P-switches. I didn't mention their debut in Mario 3 simply because they weren't a major addition, but they are put to better use here in both big and small ways. For one, World is the only game in which you can actually carry them around for certain puzzles, whereas they're stationary in virtually every other game, so that was curious to realize. Of bigger note are the major exclamation switches. Multiple times during the game, Mario will run across yellow, green, red, and blue silhouettes. These are filled in when you run across switch palaces, which allow you to access exclamation marks, the yellow and green ones granting super mushrooms and cape feathers respectively, or otherwise giving more platforms to access hidden areas and stages, or to make obstacles easier to overcome. The yellow switch palace is a freebie to introduce what these dotted line blocks are for, and how to deal with them later, but the other three are hidden, which I'll address very soon. Continuing the remainder of the first tutorial Grass World, Yoshi's Island then continues properly when selecting Yoshi's Island 2, the stage, not the game, where the eponymous Yoshi is first accessible. It shows off his various uses, including the berries to help give bonuses to players who are patient enough to go for them. The remaining stages introduce various blocks and more bottomless pits, while activating the yellow switch palace will give you more leeway to keep the training wheels on a little bit longer. Before long, you'll reach the first castle level in number 1 Iggy's Castle. Do you pronounce the number 1? I'm gonna do it anyway. The Koopalings return holding 7 of Yoshi's friends hostage in magical eggs, and these concentrated obstacle courses tend to introduce decent gimmicks and challenges. For Iggy's, fences are introduced to help showcase an extra layer of gameplay present for the mighty Super NES's improved processing power. It's a decent gimmick that's fun to mess around with, especially since you can access switch gates to go into the background yourself, so I love that extra plane to deal with. Okay, auto-scrolling challenges and timing hazards round out the return of Iggy with the concept of trying to shove him off a shifting platform into lava. It's a decent showcase of newer scaling technology and as a good first boss, completing Yoshi's Island and unlocking the wider dinosaur land itself. Now's as good a time as any to briefly summarize World in, well, Super Mario World. More like a chain of islands, Dinosaur Land is made up of 7 distinct land masses. The green-themed Yoshi's Island, the larger Donut Plains, the Vanilla Dome Cave Lake area, the athletic sky-based Twin Bridges, the secret-laden Forest of Illusion, the delicious-looking mountainous Chocolate Island, and finally the underground valley of Bowser, which is so diabolical that thunder flashes in his subterranean lair. There are 2 secretish worlds that include the Warp Access Star World, which then leads to the final world, Special Zone. They cover a wide range of the typical platforming levels to help improve on Mario 3's rapid-fire obstacle courses, which lets the player know that exploration will be rewarded in some way, and Donut Plains 1 makes it obvious with the green dot blocks hinting at an obvious secret exit above you that a player will likely not be able to reach until shortly after this. Donut Plains 2 is another red-marked cavernous stage, and the observant and experimental player might discover that Yoshi gains new abilities with specific shells. Selecting a blue shell would allow Mario and Yoshi to discover a keyhole with a key conveniently sitting beside it, leading to the now revealed Green Switch Palace, unlocking an easy path to the secret exit in Donut Plains 1. Just like that, Mario World has organically introduced you to the fact that multiple exits exist, and are often signposted, sometimes hinted at if you know what you're looking for on the world map. World continues to introduce the now classic ghost houses, puzzle stages in the Mario series that require a player to slow down and take in the hints needed to progress through the boo-infested haunted houses. These are pretty good changes in pace, fitting the need for an ebb and flow in gameplay between fast-paced action and slower puzzles to keep the player from getting bored with any particular scenario. Hidden in Donut Secret 1 is the path to Donut Secret House, with shortcuts to endgame content. A warp pipe to Donut Secret 2 clearly showcases Valley of Bowser, while the secret exit in said secret house leads to a Star Road, which gives Mario his earliest access to Star World 1. We'll get back to World 8 later. For now, number 2 Morton's Castle deals with shifting stone platforms that can crush you if you don't recognize their patterns, while reintroducing dry bones and focusing on thwomps and thwimps and increasing traps. Since I took a break after this, I rediscovered a relic from these classic games, and this is admittedly a minor nitpick to a hoarding collector like myself. Whenever you restart the game after you save from a ghost house, fortress, castle, or switch palace, you will always begin with 5 lives. This doesn't sound like much, but as this footage shows, I'm the kind of player that stacks a lot of extra lives up, so to come back and lose around 50 lives just irks me on a personal level. This slight problem is easily remedied in various ways though, including suspend states in any virtual console version, playing the GBA version and the Super NES Classic, but it is something that reared its head later on when this would actually matter, but I'll return to this when I address endgame content. Continuing through World 3, Vanilla Dome is a steady increase in challenges with underwater levels and various secrets, some of which allow you to sequence break the castles. For this very playthrough, focusing on the vanilla secret stages allowed me to access Vanilla Fortress, similar to Mario 3's various non-castle stages. This one is unique for being an underwater fortress stage, which keeps in theme with Vanilla Dome's other courses. As a side note, Yoshi does not enter into ghost houses and castle-like stages, so you can die and lose your power-ups in the stage, but still retain Yoshi when you move on, or move back to get another power-up. Yoshi may be afraid of ghosts in-game for his refusal to enter, but this is more of a technological limitation in how he operates, and how you would lose Yoshi anyways when entering the multiple doors that these stages utilize. Win-win design here. Fortress stages are home to Renzor boss fights, since the Koopalings are exclusive to castles. They're a decent enough spatial awareness boss fight, requiring some foresight and timing to come out victorious and unscathed, which will then give you access to Twin Bridges, and the ability to defeat number 4 Ludwig's castle before number 3 Lemmy's castle. This amount of freedom is welcome as a reward for experienced players, or as a nice surprise for newcomers who have the skills and willingness to explore these stages out of order. Lemmy's Wacka-Koopa design is charming and fun, and Ludwig von Koopa's homage to Bowser's classic Fire on a Bridge fight is a nice touch that neatly signals Super Mario World's halfway point. The game's multiple secrets come to the forefront when reaching the Forest of Illusion. Over half the stages have an alternate exit here, with many looping around to other stages whose exits either lead nowhere or lead into a stage you've already completed. Why wouldn't you return and find those exits, you ask? Well, Super Mario World's base 100% completion note is displayed whenever you select your file on the main menu. These numbers indicate how many exits you've discovered, for a total of 96 exits hidden throughout its 76 levels, with each version having a unique marker to display if you found them all. As mentioned before, the GBA version keeps track of Dragon Coins at each stage, but it's up to you if the game keeping score is enough to convince you to discover redundant exits. This forest does a good job at bringing the secrets into the spotlight, as Forest of Illusion 3's alternate exit is required to reach number 5 Roy Castle to defeat the game. So if you had been ignoring exploring for secrets, this is where that roadblock will surface until you find the hidden key to move on. After dealing with a riff off of Morton Koopa Jr.'s fight, this is where I had activated all 4 Switch Palaces and was able to head off to Star World, and beat all of its 5 stages. If you run across the entrance back in Donut Plains, you can make it all the way to Star World 4 before reaching a standstill. Blue Switch Palace is recommended here unless you're crazy good, but whenever you reach it is up to you. The world itself also doubles as Mario 3's Warp Zone allegory, which is nice if you need a specific power-up including Yoshi on a whim and don't want to travel the entire world map. Star World's 5 levels are all based around a gimmick ramped up to an extreme, be it a long sky stage, an underwater course with a ridiculous amount of fishy foes, or a ton of turning blocks. Not only are the stages more intense than many of the main levels, they can also only be properly defeated by finding their alternate exits, which tend to take a specific skill set for the talented and determined. Of particular note are the baby Yoshis obtainable in these stages, colored adorable chibi dinosaurs that when fed enough will grow into a colored Yoshi for your convenience if you want a particular ability, likely the blue Yoshi. They're basically warm-ups for the actual endgame levels, but I'll return to them after I stop getting sidetracked. Back on Chocolate Island, World continues to build up the challenges appropriately, being the penultimate world in the base game. Of particular note is Chocolate Island 2, in which the level sections are dictated by the coins collected in the first area, then based on how much time remains in Area 2, which determines if Mario reaches the secret exit or continues forward. Chocolate Island 3 once again has a normal exit that leads the player in a loop unless they find the alternate exit to reach Chocolate Fortress. After conquering various vats of hot chocolate and slanted platforms of various makes, Number 6 Wendy's castle is challenged and overcome, opening the way to the Valley of Bowser. To enter King Koopa's hidden base, Mario must dive into the sunken ghost ship, a neat callback to Mario 3's airships and a neat subtle hint at where Bowser is located. You know, if the cliffs weren't telegraphing it in the middle of the map. Whatever, you know what I mean. Filled with invincible disappearing Boo Buddies, possibly as a reference to the downed enemies. Maybe I'm overthinking too much on this one, I don't know. The end of the stage even has a magic ball without a Boom Boom guarding it. Collecting it reveals the Bowser-shaped cavern and the proper entrance to view his party-lit castle. The end in sight, Super Mario World throws its final batch of normal underground base levels at you, plus a fortress and ghost house for good measure. Once Number 7 Iggy Castle is toppled, the front door of Bowser's Castle is accessible for a similar light puzzle challenge. It's worth noting that a secret exit leads to a backdoor entrance to the final castle that bypasses most of the preamble of the major areas, leading directly to the big red boss door against King Koopa himself. This fight uses another indirect method of defeating Bowser, in this case throwing his Mecha Koopas back up at him, for Bowser can't quite reach his nemesis due to his large clown car. With some assistance from Princess Toadstool between phases and a triumphant defeat, Mario and/or Luigi are rewarded with a kiss and fireworks. Triumphant music plays as the credits roll and Yoshi assisting Princess Peach from the castle roof and dragging the eggs behind him, in a neat prelude to his mechanics in the sequel prequel. They return to Yoshi's house as the 7 captured baby Yoshis hatch, and all resume their vacation. Happy ending. But your adventure likely isn't over yet. This is usually when I do the secret and/or extra levels after beating a game for the first time, but you are almost advised to do as many stages as possible before beating the game and saving. You may exhale a frustrated sigh through clenched teeth, realizing you haven't saved in hours and just lost 87 lives that would no doubt have come in handy for Special Zone and its trickery once you beat the game. Don't worry, I quickly got over the somber realization. This is where that trick I kept alluding to earlier comes in handy. Though it does take a bit of grinding in a Mario game, as weird as that sounds to say out loud. Now for all the little miscellaneous details I didn't cover before because I'm apparently a fan of dry chronological explanations for this ancient game everyone knows pretty much everything about, but here I go anyway. Aside from the delightful act of holding empty Koopa shells indefinitely, other changes have occurred since Mario 3 to better balance the scales. In terms of holding items, World only gives you one window, and it's one that triggers immediately when you take damage. That's due to the fact that this game reverts back to Super Mario Bros. Rules in that any damage you take brings you straight back down to small form instead of Mario 3's global change to downgrading a level to super form. It prevents the hoarding of items, but I think this is a fair trade-off, since Yoshi can be seen as the theoretically infinite damage shield if you can catch him after you take damage. You can manually drop your spare item with select, but it does balance out that you need to either eliminate what harms you or get out of the way before you lose your stored backup. This can be frustrating if you get caught in a bad situation and lose both items, but there is a special area that makes regaining both power-ups and lives trivial. There's a secret exit hidden in Donut Ghost House that leads to the top secret area. This single-screen stage allows you access to 4 power-ups, the 2 left question mark blocks carrying fire flowers and are mirrored by 2 cape feathers on the other side. In the middle is a Yoshi egg, which when hit with possessing a Yoshi gives you a 1-up mushroom. This area also restocks every time you enter and exit, so whenever you say beat the game without save states and are about to challenge harder stages and don't feel like going back to redo a ghost house to manually save every other stage because you're probably going to lose those lives, this is a handy alternative. On a related side note, any power-up collected when out of small form gets put into reserve, which can then override a specific power-up if you aren't ready for it. Just something to be aware of if you're saving a cape feather for something specific and accidentally get like 2 fire flowers. It's not that difficult to collect these the old-fashioned way, as you can back out of any completed level by pressing select when paused, which keeps any power-up including Yoshi when you exit. Nice quality of life details for any newer players watching this. Each of the gnarly Special Zone stages are named after tubular words of a time gone by. You may think this is either way cool or not very awesome to reference such a big-haired era, but I personally think these are fun stages with groovy names. The challenges are mondo hard compared to most of World's regular stages, but they aren't so outrageous as to be Super Mario Maker levels of unfair in their gimmicks and challenges. I hope someone watching this appreciates my funky use of the English language, dudes and dudettes. Overcoming these 8 endgame levels rewards you with a nice "you are a super player" message, and then changes the season into autumn. It looks really nice here. Yoshi's Island has a much cozier feeling, many of the enemies have alterations to their sprites, like Koopas wearing giant Mario heads for some reason, and Chocolate Island turning into Mint Chocolate Island. It's a really nice touch. You can't reverse this change, however, so if you want it back to normal, you have to start a new game. It's a nice visual representation that you did conquer the final world, since most of the games in the future don't do this. And that's pretty much everything I have to say on this classic. Super Mario World is pretty much a textbook case of a classic sequel. It essentially improves on its 3 predecessors in every way, be they graphics, music, controls, or gameplay. I find it a perfect sister game to Super Mario Bros. 3, since they complement each other pretty well. While Mario 3 has some pretty short levels with focused challenges, multiple power-ups to play with, and a decent difficulty to match it, the other side of the coin, that is World, has much larger courses with a much more gradual and paced difficulty, with fewer power-ups with more variety and hidden shortcuts per level. The best I can describe the differences and similarities between these two classics is that Mario 3 is a 100-meter dash versus World's 10-mile marathon. Both involve the same fundamentals, but run at different paces. It's why whenever I get asked what my favorite 2D Mario game is, especially for this classic series, it always depends on my mood. I love Mario 3's brisk pace and harder difficulty, for me at least, and the variance of power-ups, but then I also love how sprawling World's adventure is. So gun to my head, I'd say World does it more for me right now at this place in time in March 2018 than Mario 3, but only just barely. They're pretty interchangeable for me. There is no wrong answer here. I'd personally recommend Super Mario Bros. 3 and Super Mario World to anyone who wants to play a classic 2D Mario game. They're the top of the classic games here for sure. Absence makes the heart grow fonder after all, and there's a reason that these 4 2D Mario games influenced the series so much. Ushering in the era of the mascot platformer, Mario would next take a leap into polygonal 3D 5 years later, and I'm going to love diving into those. Long story short, World is great, and there's a reason it tops so many lists when you ask what Mario game is their favorite. These Super NES games were truly part of a great era in how many different games came out with fantastic sprite work and improved gameplay. So many games from this era have aged gracefully. Go out and play World if you never have if you love platformers, and hopefully I've been preaching to a choir on why Super Mario Bros. 4 here was an amazing launch title. It was one of the earliest examples to me on what next gen actually was, before I fully realized what next gen meant. Growing up in the 90s and early 2000s really was the best for all these technological breakthroughs that changed entertainment drastically. And that covers the classic Mario platformers. I know I likely came across as an excessively glowing fanboy on these games, but can you really blame me? These games certainly aren't flawless, but they're a very fun time that managed to be distinct and constantly either trying new things or improving upon the classic formula that platformers would definitely codify for years. I'm fairly confident that I'm not glued to my nostalgia goggles too much on these games, but I'd love to know which of the classic 2D Mario games in particular are your guys' favorites. There's really no wrong answer to this besides Mario 2, so this was a pleasure to play through and help detail some of my favorite childhood games. I'm playing through Yoshi's Island right now, since it is right here on the Super NES Classic, so that's likely going to be the next immediate review, though I will likely space out the remaining series like Yoshi's Story for the time being. These games that are softball pilots are really tricky to place. Are they the end of a previous franchise, or do you consider them the start of a sub-series? These are the weird questions that drive me nuts and keep me up at night. Anyways, I just finished the console Uncharted games. We're playing through the Nathan Drake collection, and I finally finished Uncharted 4 and The Lost Legacy after everyone's already had a go at them months and years ago. Those will likely be the next games I tackle after Yoshi's Island. I'll likely throw in The Last of Us here as well, since I do need to replay that for various related reasons, so that should be fun. Throw in a very recent franchise before diving back into the older ones. Switch it up a bit. Not sure what classic series I'll return to, but I know that Zelda and Kingdom Hearts in particular are both on my list. I'll likely alternate between a few of these depending on my mood, so we'll see how I feel. This one did take longer than expected, considering that this was only one title this time instead of the previous 4, so I'm sorry to anyone who actually waited for this back when I had 16 subscribers in early March 2018. I've had weird uploading issues lately, since my final gameplay video for my Metal Gear playthroughs just will not upload no matter what I do, and I've tried that one for like a month now. I don't know if it's YouTube, I don't know if it's my internet, whatever. At this point it doesn't really matter. Technical issues will be the death of us all, I'm sure. Anyway, hope you enjoyed my ramblings, and I'll see you in the next video.